The Duke of West 14th Street had a mustache so long the tips tickled his earlobes, and affixed beneath the mustache was a permanent sneer. A sneer which communicated a sort of casual disregard for humanity reserved for those raised with a lot of money. I'm Anonymous Cubed. I'm a detective, and I'd been hired by the Duke to find the last potato chip that was supposed to have been at the bottom of a bag of extra fancy potato chips. The chip had presumably been stolen earlier that very night at a lavish dinner party that was still ongoing. The party was a welcome home event for some aristocrat named Flip Falloway. The Duke and some of his cohorts were pretending that Flip had recently returned from several years abroad, when in fact the poor fellow had just woken up from a 6-year coma after getting beamed in the back of his brain with a rock-hard wiener at a frozen hot dog eating contest. As far as the missing potato chip went, the suspects were too numerable to list and were all filthy rich, my least favorite kind of filth. There was a princess with bright blue gemstone teeth and an astrological disorder which caused her to think everybody she met was a Gemini. She laughed like a dying donkey and drank like a healthy horse. One fellow was apparently the heir to a lunch meat empire. A billionaire at birth, but the downside was that being born just downwind of the central processing plant, the guy had smelled of salami all his life. A fact his friends never let him live down. The rich can be so cruel. I figure that's how they get so rich in the first place. I spent a couple hours talking to one of the butlers because he seemed pretty cool. Poor guy only had one hand. The other had been lost by his employer in some bet about who could buy the biggest yacht and then blow it up. Eventually, I found the missing last potato chip. Rather than being stolen, it had fallen behind a solid gold radiator, where it had gone unseen for the night. The chip was still in pristine condition and looked delicious. These chips had been functioning on Highlander rules, which meant the last one had absorbed all the powers and tastiness of its fallen brethren. I considered turning it in for the reward, but the money didn't really seem worth it. I'd already gotten a free meal out of the deal, just pilfering snacks from the hors d'oeuvres table. Deviled eggs and fancy Cheetos mostly, which were mixing in my belly like a fine wine which itself had been mixed with gasoline and deviled eggs. So, instead, I split the chip with a pigeon which had just happened to alight on the windowsill just above that solid gold radiator. A pigeon who I named Bruce, after my accountant, the Incredible Hulk. Bruce seemed to enjoy the chip as much as I did, pecking up every last crumb before soaring back off into the night like so much star dust and bird shit. The Duke of West 14th Street was pretty pissed when I told him that I'd come up empty, and wound up saying some stuff I found a little crude, so I made sure to give him a little kick to the balls on my way out the door, which was right after I mentioned to his remaining friends that he'd been feeding them common cola all night, not the fancy stuff they usually drank, which had to be imported from several different impoverished nations where the stuff was produced in methods which had been designed to be harmful to the local communities. Being ashamed to admit that they couldn't tell the difference between their usually fancy cola and the common stuff drunk by the poor folks, the party-goers turned on their host like the ugly goblins they all secretly were under their finery and credit cards. I don't know if they actually ate him, but he sure won't be throwing any fancy parties for a while. Anyway, I'm Anonymous Cubed. I'm a detective, and I'm also a private eye. But I guess that's kind of the same thing. Sometimes I get results. Sometimes I just get enough to eat.